kind of an obscure topic, somewhat obscure topic on this episode of Dealing With Things No One Teaches You. Talking today about tinnitus, also pronounced tinnitus. And for those that don't know, tinnitus is the ringing in your ears that you experience if you have permanent hearing damage of some sort. And it's not a problem everyone has, because not everyone has hearing damage, right? But it is definitely something that can psychologically affect people, and it certainly psychologically affected me negatively when I realized that I had tinnitus. I remember waking up at my grandparents' house and the alarm going off, and immediately the ringing started, and since then it hasn't really stopped. And to some people it might seem a bit benign to be concerned about this, but I love music, and music was a huge part of my life, especially in college, because I was a radio DJ and I was also a hip-hop party DJ as well. And permanent hearing damage, of course, entails the fact that there are frequencies that you can no longer hear anymore. And the first frequencies to go are the high frequencies, right? And when I first realized I had tinnitus and there was ringing, it was quite depressing, to be honest, because of the fact that I value my hearing sense so much, and my ability to hear music is something that I really cherish, because not everybody has that ability. Some people are born deaf, some people become deaf as a result of accidents or otherwise, and it definitely affected me psychologically, as I said, and I went into a slight depression because of it. And the reason for the dog, my getting tinnitus, right, or getting this hearing damage, was because of the fact that I was DJing so much, particularly house parties when you're in the basement. It's really loud, and I wasn't wearing earplugs or any sort of hearing protection. And this kind of adds up after a while, right? Especially when you're, mixing, you're putting mixes together, musical mixes, and there's a cumulative effect. And there's this graph I recall my high school physics teacher showing the class, and it was illustrating the ringing effect in people's ears, and the fact that there has to be a time period where that ringing must process, because it's a defense kind of mechanism that the body physically imposes to protect the ears more, right? It's a reaction, I guess would be a more accurate way to put it. And that's a good point there, Autumn, is you got to be aware of when you do go to concerts. And I actually don't even go to concerts anymore, partially because of this, but also because of the fact that there's another thing you got to be aware of. If you work with power tools, if you work in a warehouse, it may not hurt your ears right away, but if you're there all day, that adds up. And as I said before, I don't go to concerts anymore because of that, partially, but also I just don't like being in huge crowds that much. And this graph that my physics teacher showed us, basically, and I'll look it up later and see if I can post it. It shows that the relationship between decibels, time of exposure to those decibels, and how long the ringing will be occurring in your ears. And for people without hearing damage, this is only temporary, right? Thanks, Chris. But for people with hearing damage, the ringing is always there, and sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's less. And this can be also affected or compounded by previous hearing damage or previous hearing loss. For example, I didn't know that I was actually born partially deaf in my right ear. And the reason I didn't know that is because it's only a certain amount of frequencies. It's higher frequencies. Like last time I tested it, in my right ear, seems to be a more affluent area. Yeah, it's definitely a nicer area than commie country. Not as many college dumbasses around. But I can't hear above, it's about 13 and a half, 13,500 hertz in my right ear. I can't hear anything. And I can only hear some of the frequencies from about 8,000 to 13,000 and a half hertz, 13,500 hertz in that right ear as well. My left ear is my good ear. I can hear about 17,500 hertz, which is better than most adults. Most adults can only hear on average about 16,000 hertz in their ears. But humans are born with the ability to hear, catch my breath, up to 20,000 hertz. So the human range of hearing is 20 hertz, which is like a really low rumble, which can barely be perceptibly detected, and 20,000 hertz. And by the time we're probably 4 or 5 or 6, we have pretty much all lost hearing from 16,000 to 20,000 hertz. But again, some of us not so much. As I said, last time I tested, I can hear a little over 17,000 hertz with this, which is pretty good. It's above average for sure. But again, my right ear, I can't hear anything above 13,500 hertz. And even below that, from about 8,000 to 13,000, which is conversational frequencies, especially for women, because they have higher voices, right? I have trouble hearing too. So especially if I'm at a social gathering and I'm talking to a woman, I have to turn my left ear to her often, because my right ear, I just can't hear what she's saying a lot of times. Even men too, like depending on how loud the party is or the social gathering is, I might not be able to hear. So dealing with it emotionally definitely was a process, and it made me, I think, grateful for the fact that I had hearing at all. And this was definitely as I said, it took some time to get to. It was a process to get to that point where it was like, well, I'm grateful that I can hear music at all, and that I do have a really good left ear. My left ear is actually better than most people's ears. And even if I was born partially deaf, in my right ear, that's okay. And it is interesting too, because when I was a child, when I would watch TV, my mother noticed that I would turn my head to the right, and we never figured out why this was. I would do this subconsciously, and it was because I was partially deaf in this ear. So I would subconsciously turn my head to the right because I heard the TV better. But what are some things you can do if you have recently got tinnitus? Again, there's that process of becoming grateful for the fact that you haven't become fully deaf yet, right? And eventually you do tune it out. Like if I pay attention to it, I can hear it, especially in my right ear. I can hear it. It's louder in my right ear. But again, you eventually do tune it out. It's kind of like, You know, if I shaved my head off and then put a wig on, eventually I would just get used to the wig being on my head, right? Perception-wise. Perceptive, there's a phrase for it, I can't remember, but you get used to it. Or like, you know, even having your t-shirt on your body, you get used to this feeling. Likewise, you get used to the ringing in your ears and you learn to tune it out, right, without even thinking about it. But again, initially that's quite hard to do, especially if music is really important to you and you really do cherish the ability to hear, you know, your sonic perceptibility. But there are things that make it worse, and these are called autotoxic drugs, or drugs that can actually make it worse, either temporarily or permanently. Now, most of these are temporarily. There are a very rare number of drugs that, if abused, can actually make it permanently worse, and I will link a list of all autotoxic drugs or drugs that negatively affect hearing. But what I've noticed is caffeine, nicotine especially. Smokers have a higher incidence of hearing loss than non-smokers. Particularly nicotine, it doesn't seem to be as it doesn't seem to be prevalent among marijuana smokers. So that's another good reason why I quit, because I did notice that too. If I hadn't smoked a cigarette in a few weeks and I smoked a cigarette, my ears would start ringing louder again. Caffeine, again, as I said, alcohol as well causes more ringing in the ears. And again, this is listed on those autotoxic drugs, which can temporarily make this ringing worse. Now, it doesn't permanently make it worse as far as I know, but I have noticed a subjective increase in that ringing when I do drink, especially if you take a break from these things, you know, whether it is caffeine, nicotine, or alcohol, and then you go back to it, I noticed that ringing increase. And one thing I did to help with this, and you know, most people necessarily wouldn't be interested in making this investment, but it is an option out there, and that is this: custom-made earplugs. And I got this done at the audiology department at the University of Wisconsin. I got a mold fit to my ears, and then they made custom-made earplugs for me. And these earplugs attenuate sound, kind of like a compression filter on an audio track. And what I mean by that is, instead of making a hard limiter, right, which a limiter is another audio effect you can put on tracks, and what that does is it picks a level of decibels and it immediately cuts everything off higher than that, right at that level, right? A compression filter attenuates, you know, it attenuates kind of on a spectrum or on a slope, right? So at this level, right, where that limiter would immediately cut off all frequencies, a compression filter would only cut off a few. And then as you go higher up in the level of volume, it'll cut off more and more frequencies until the sound is completely cut off. And this custom-made earplugs that I have, it mimics this sort of filter. So it doesn't completely block out all the sound up to a certain decibel. So because of that, it makes it easy to use these sorts of chipmunk, these sorts of earplugs and still hear things, right? So I can use these earplugs and still DJ, or work in a warehouse, or work with power tools with my cousin or something like that, right? So that's another option people can have. And again, there's also, you know, you can get the disposable earplugs as well, but these don't work as well for me particularly. I've always had trouble keeping them in my ears. Yeah, and like Autumn said, you know, you get used to it. And I remember the first few months when I had it, and this was 2016, the summer of 2016, it was depressing, man. It was really depressing. I was like, shit, man, I'm losing my hearing. And from then on, I took it quite seriously. But again, it's not the end of the world. I can still hear music, and getting over that emotional, psychological barrier is, I think, the hardest thing, especially once you reach a certain age. It's pretty much inevitable, and it's something everybody goes through to a certain degree, right? Not everybody loses hearing to the same level. But if you're a construction worker, if you work with power tools, if you're a musician, a producer, DJ, all of these occupations entail loud levels of noise over an extended period of time. So these sorts of people need to take this thing much more seriously. And this is again where the adage idiom by Benjamin Franklin comes into play and is extremely applicable. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? If you just put those earplugs in, even if it's only half the time or some of the time, that's going to go a long way towards preventing hearing damage. And I think that's really important, that especially young people consider, because young people are the ones that are usually at these loud concerts, listening to loud music. And I remember my physics teacher telling me this too. He regrets going to concerts and not bringing earplugs, or just going to concerts and on a frequent basis and exposing himself to those loud noises, because once you lose some frequencies of hearing, you don't get them back. It's not like eyesight where you can change your diet, or maybe get LASIK or something if you were born with bad eyes, which fortunately I was not. Once you lose hearing, that's it, right? You can't really, there's not much you can do. You can get hearing aids, right? But those only help so much. And I think they are, obviously looking into researching how to fix this at a better degree. But just to review, things to avoid are any sort of autotoxic drugs, if possible, right? Caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, these all make it temporarily worse. But there are prescription drugs, which I can't list off the top of my head, but I will link that autotoxic drug list in the comments once I get back to the crib. Which, again, a combination of these drugs can actually permanently damage your hearing even more. So there's that to consider. Hearing protection, again, whether that's disposable earplugs or custom-made earplugs like I have. And they were pretty expensive. They're about $250 I paid for those custom-made earplugs. And fortunately, I still have them. I haven't lost them. I've had them for about 4 years now. And they've done me well. You got to be sure to clean them, though, on a regular basis, or before you put them in, at least. So, avoiding those autotoxic drugs, earplugs, whether it's those custom-made ones, temporary ones, or even just those longer-term permanent ones, which you can buy, that construction workers use. And my cousin uses, because he's a carpenter, so his aren't custom made, but they're not disposable. So he can put them in, and it attenuates to, I think it's like 90 decibels or something like that. And another demographic of people this is important for as well are people who like shooting. If you're into firearms, if you're hunting, right? I remember the last time I shot... No, it wasn't the last time, was it? Yeah, it was the last time I shot at a deer. My ears rang for a good 2 days. And, that's just not something I'm going to do again, I don't think, because if you know anything about deer hunting, you never hear them coming. You almost never hear them coming, unless it's, opening weekend of gun weekend, and the deer are just sprinting all over the woods. Then you can hear them. But even then, that's only sometimes. You know, they're so quiet, these animals. So you almost always see them before you hear them. And because of that, when I go hunting next, I'm just gonna wear ear protection, probably from the get-go, because when you do see that deer, you may not have time to put your earring protection in, because you may scare them away with the noise you make, right? So hunters and people who like shoot and trap, very important that you protect your ears, because, you know, shooting off shotguns or especially high-powered rifles, extremely loud, like a 308 or a 450 Bushmaster, as we were talking about the other night. These sorts of long-range rifles are really powerful, and because of that, they're really loud, especially right next to your ear. So yeah, I mean, you can permanently damage your ear with a single rifle shot. So something to keep in mind as well. And even a handgun. One of my friends, he has a Glock, and you know, this is not his fault necessarily. He's never really shot a handgun before, but those things are loud, and you got to wear ear protection even when you're shooting handguns too. So there is a last resort I think that people can use as well, and that's using some sort of muscle relaxant or barbiturate, although I think barbiturates are kind of going out of business and style just because of how dangerous they can be. But the reason is muscle relaxants, they make it so those small kind of veins and vessels, especially around your ear, open up more, and so that attenuates the ringing as well. But again, that's only temporarily done, and it's not something I would recommend either, because you can get addicted to that too. And again, like it only makes the ringing go away for a little bit, and you have to take more of the drugs. So the best thing to do is to learn to live with this ringing. It's always there for me now on both ears, especially my right ear, and you learn to tune it out, and you learn when to protect your ears, you know, whether it's shooting guns, listening to music, DJing, going to concerts, even going to parties, working in a warehouse, right? These are all situations where you should strongly consider, or it'd be highly recommended to use some sort of hearing protection. So that is my dealing with on tinnitus, also called tinnitus, the ringing in your ears that is caused by hearing damage. And one more thing too, because it can be an annoyance to fall asleep with this ringing, and that's to have some sort of white noise in the background, whether that's a fan, a white noise machine, or, you know, artificial breeze machine, artificial ocean noises, whatever it may be. And these things help anyone fall asleep generally too. So if you're having trouble falling asleep because of this ringing, white noise machine or a fan is a good way to go. So that's my dealing with on tinnitus, also called tinnitus, the ringing in your ears that you get from hearing damage. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as Benjamin Franklin said, especially with regards to hearing loss. And if you do experience some hearing loss and some tinnitus, it's not the end of the world. You know, it's something that a lot of people deal with, even if they don't necessarily talk about it. And, you know, you have to get to that process, at that point of being grateful for the hearing that you do have, and just take the necessary steps to prevent any further loss of hearing. So, this is Ads talking about dealing with tinnitus. Stay frosty, folks. Cheers. All the best. Until next time.